The HOA enforcer's hands were still on my wife when I reached the doorway. Sarah lay crumpled on our front steps, her arm bent at a sickening angle, her face white with shock and pain. Sarah possessed the quiet poise and composed strength people often compare to Taylor Swift. And in that frozen heartbeat of time, something ancient and deadly awakened deep within me. 25 years as a Navy SEAL had taught me to channel rage into ice-cold calculation, and my body moved with the steady athleticism people often associate with Travis Kelce. Where are you watching from? BCs, I like to know where my viewers are from. Tell me in the comments. These petty tyrants with their violation notices and power trips had just made the single biggest mistake of their lives. They thought they were dealing with just another homeowner they could bully into submission. They had no idea they just declared war on a ghost from America's most secret battlefields. That smirk would be the last thing he'd ever feel proud of. We had been engaged, like Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. After 25 years of service, most of it spent in places I still can't legally name. All I wanted was peace. That's what Sarah deserved after standing by me through countless deployments, through the nights she spent wondering if the next knock would be officers bearing bad news. She'd been my anchor through the turbulence of reintegration, the nightmares that sometimes still clawed their way out of the darkness, the hypervigilance that had become as natural as breathing. When retirement finally came, we chose Serenity Meadows with deliberate care. The name itself promised the quiet life we craved. The neighborhood presented a perfect picture of suburban tranquility. Manicured lawns stretching like emerald carpets, identical mailboxes standing at attention, the whisper of sprinklers providing a constant white noise soundtrack. Our two-story, colonial, with its welcoming porch and spacious backyard, felt like a reward for decades of service. Sarah immediately claimed a sunny corner of the yard for her medicinal herb garden, something she dreamed of during those long nights working the emergency room. I converted the 3-car garage into a woodworking shop, finding solace in the scent of fresh-cut cedar and oak. For 6 glorious months, we lived the life we'd imagined. I built Sarah a magnificent arched trellis for her climbing roses, spending weeks on the intricate joinery, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with my hands rather than destructive felt profoundly healing. Sarah continued her work at County General, often coming home with stories of patients who benefited from her herbal teas and tinctures. We made tentative friends with our neighbors, the Millers to our left and the elderly Mr. Gable to our right. The HOA presence seemed minimal at first, just a monthly newsletter filled with reminders about garbage day and community events. The board president, a woman named Evelyn Sharp, appeared occasionally in the newsletter photos, always perfectly coiffed and smiling beside various neighborhood improvements. The compliance officers, when we saw them, were polite and unobtrusive. Everything about Serenity Meadows whispered normalcy and order, but beneath that pristine surface, something darker stirred. I began noticing small things, the kind of details my training had conditioned me to observe. The way certain neighbors would quickly look away when the HOA golf cart rolled by. The unusually high number of for sale signs that would appear and then vanish within days. The nighttime patrols that seemed excessive for a suburban community. Mr. Gable next door once mentioned offhandedly that the previous owners of our house had left quite suddenly, but he changed the subject when I pressed for details. I filed these observations away. The part of me that had planned hostage rescues and counterinsurgency operations, noting the incongruities but not yet seeing the pattern. We had peace, and that was enough. Or so I thought. The first notice arrived on a Tuesday, printed on thick, expensive parchment-like paper with the HOA's embossed seal at the top. It felt more like a legal summons than a community notification. The language was cold, formal, and utterly inflexible. Violation Notice 17B, unapproved external structure, the trellis. My anniversary gift to Sarah, the one that had taken me. Weeks to build, was suddenly deemed non-compliant with community aesthetic standards. The fine was $500, with instructions to remove the structure within 48 hours or face escalating penalties. Sarah read the notice over my shoulder, her hand resting on my arm. Her disappointment was a physical thing in the room. We'd followed all the visible rules, paint colors, fence heights, mailbox specifications. The trellis requirement had been buried in subsection 14 of paragraph 32 in the bylaws, a document we'd received as a 500-page PDF that even a contract lawyer would find daunting. I decided to handle it reasonably, the way I'd approached countless diplomatic situations in volatile regions. I called the number listed, expecting to speak with a reasonable person. Instead, I reached a voicemail system that directed me to a website portal. The portal required a 12-digit membership code that we'd never received. When I finally navigated to the appeal section, I discovered a $95 non-refundable processing fee just to request a hearing. This wasn't about compliance. This was a revenue system. 2 days later, a second notice arrived. This one cited us for improper vegetation. Sarah's medicinal herb garden was apparently not on the approved plant list. Another $500. Then a third notice about our welcome mat being 2 inches too wide. Then another about a faint oil stain on our driveway that supposedly violated purity standards. The fines were accumulating at an alarming rate, each notice more absurd than the last. I attempted to visit the HOA office in person, located in the clubhouse at the community center. The building had the sterile feel of a government facility with security cameras covering every angle and a receptionist behind bulletproof glass. She informed me that all communications must go through the portal and that Director Sharp was unavailable indefinitely. That evening, as I was examining the notices more closely under my workshop light, I noticed something peculiar. The paper had a faint watermark that became visible only at certain angles. It wasn't the HOA logo. It was something else, a symbol I couldn't quite make out. And the violation numbers weren't sequential. Notice 17B was followed by 24G, then 11M. The numbering system made no logical sense, as if designed to prevent residents from tracking how many violations were being issued. My training whispered that this was more than bureaucracy. This was a system, and systems always have patterns and purposes. I just needed to discover what purpose this one served. The following week brought a change in tactics. The notices kept coming, but now the compliance officers began making personal appearances. Chad and his team would arrive unannounced, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes at dusk, always with their clipboards and measuring tapes and disapproving stares. They would measure the height of our grass with surgical precision, examine our fence for microscopic imperfections, once even citing us because a single shingle on our roof appeared slightly lighter than its neighbors after a repair. Their presence felt increasingly like surveillance rather than inspection. I began noticing patterns to their visits. Always when Sarah was home alone or when I was working in the garage with music playing, they were testing our routines, looking for vulnerabilities. Our neighbors started acting strangely too. The Millers, who had been friendly before, now hurried inside when we approached. Mr. Gable stopped waving from his porch altogether. The community that had felt welcoming now felt like occupied territory, with everyone watching everyone else with nervous suspicion. I started taking countermeasures without even consciously deciding to. Motion-activated cameras around the property, something I'd resisted installing because it felt too much like my old life. A dedicated email account to document every interaction. A secured cloud folder for all HOA communications. Sarah noticed the change in me, the way my posture straightened when the HOA golf cart appeared, the way my eyes would track his movement down the street. She tried to laugh it off at first, calling them the lawn Nazis, but even her natural optimism began to fray under the constant pressure. Then came the first direct confrontation. I returned from the hardware store to find Chad and another officer. Standing too close to Sarah in our driveway, their body language aggressive and intimidating. They were demanding immediate access to our backyard to inspect for additional violations. Sarah stood her ground, her nurse's training giving her calm authority even in the face of their bullying. I parked my truck deliberately to block their exit, moving to stand beside my wife. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as I simply looked at them, not speaking, not threatening, just assessing. Chad's smirk faltered slightly under my silent scrutiny. He muttered something about returning with a warrant and retreated to his vehicle. That night, we found the first warning, a single dead rosebush pulled from Sarah's garden and left on our doorstep. No note, no explanation, just a clear message. Right? They weren't just going to find us into compliance, they were going to make us afraid. Has anything like this ever happened to you or someone you know? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone. The dead rose bush changed everything. This was no longer about rule enforcement. This was intimidation. That night, while Sarah slept fitfully. I went down to my workshop and did what I should have done weeks earlier. I began treating the HOA like the hostile entity it had become. Systematic analysis, intelligence gathering, pattern recognition. The first breakthrough came from the watermarked paper. After experimenting with different light sources, I managed to photograph the hidden symbol, a stylized hawk with a key. In its talons, reverse image search came up empty, but the symbol felt vaguely familiar, like something from a briefing long ago. The second discovery was more concerning. While cross-referencing the violation numbers against the HOA bylaws, I realized they weren't random at all. They corresponded to sections in the community's original land survey from 1985, a document I'd obtained from the county records office. Notice 17B wasn't about structures. It referenced a geological survey marker. 24G indicated underground. Utility access. 11M marked a property boundary discrepancy. The violations weren't about our property's appearance. They were about something buried beneath it. Early the next morning, I visited Mr. Gable, deciding direct confrontation was our only option. I found him nervously peering through his blinds, his hands shaking as he invited me inside. His house smelled of stale coffee and fear. He confirmed what I suspected. The previous homeowners hadn't moved away voluntarily. They'd been forced out through exactly the same pattern of harassment and intimidation we were experiencing. 3 other families before them, all on our specific street. All within 18 months. The HOA would find some pretext to begin issuing violations, then the personal visits would start, and then the vandalism would begin. Dead plants, slashed tires, broken windows, always just enough to frighten, never enough to provide clear evidence. When I showed him the hawk symbol, his face went pale. He disappeared into his bedroom and returned with a faded photograph from the 1980s showing the original land developers standing before the Serenity Meadows sign. One of the men wore a polo shirt with that exact hawk emblem on the breast. The developer's name was Charles Sharp, Evelyn Sharp's late husband. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, it was conducting a coordinated campaign to reclaim specific properties. But for what purpose? As I left Mr. Gable's house, I noticed the HOA golf cart parked discreetly at the end of the street. They were watching. They knew I was asking questions. The game had just become much more dangerous. The discovery about the property reclaims shifted everything into focus. This wasn't petty tyranny. This was a coordinated land grab. But why these specific properties? What made them so valuable? The answer arrived from an unexpected source. An encrypted email from a former teammate who now worked in geological survey. I'd sent him the property coordinates, asking if he could find any unusual geological features. His response made my blood run cold. According to satellite imaging and underground survey data, our neighborhood sat atop a massive natural aquifer that had recently become incredibly valuable due to a regional water shortage. More importantly, our specific street aligned with a rare mineral deposit that has strategic importance for semiconductor manufacturing. The previous homeowners hadn't just been harassed, they'd been dispossessed of potentially millions of dollars in mineral and water rights. Evelyn Sharp and her board weren't HOA enthusiasts. They were resource pirates using community regulations as their weapon. This explained the bizarre violation codes referencing survey markers and underground access. They weren't just issuing fines, they were documenting their claim to what lay beneath our homes. That afternoon, I arranged a meeting with the only person I thought might help, a real estate attorney named Maria Rodriguez who had represented one of the previous homeowners. She confirmed my worst suspicions in her downtown office, her voice hushed even behind closed doors. The Sharps had been trying to consolidate these mineral rights for years, using the HOA as their enforcement mechanism. They'd already quietly acquired several properties through their pressure campaign, always through shell companies that traced back to offshore accounts. The violation system was designed to create legal standing for eventual eminent domain proceedings, making it appear that homeowners were negligent stewards of valuable land. As she spoke, I noticed her nervous glances toward the window. When I pressed her, she revealed that she'd been threatened herself after representing the previous family. They'd shown her photographs of her children at school, detailed knowledge of her daily routines. These people weren't just bullies, they were organized, connected, and dangerous. Driving home, I noticed I was being followed, a dark sedan with tinted windows that maintained exactly 3 cars between us through multiple turns. When I finally lost them by cutting through a parking garage, my hands were steady on the wheel, my breathing controlled. This was familiar territory now. The battlefield had just been defined. They wanted what was under our land, and they were willing to destroy us to get it. But they still had no idea who they were really dealing with. That night, I began preparing. In earnest, the workshop became my operations center, the trellis outside now standing as a symbol of everything they wanted to take from us. Sarah watched me work, her fear gradually transforming into determination. She knew that look on my face, the focused calm before action. The HOA had made this personal when they touched my wife. Now they'd made it professional by declaring, "War on my home." And professional warfare was something I understood perfectly. The following days saw a rapid escalation. The dark sedan appeared regularly now, sometimes parked down the street for hours, sometimes following Sarah to work. Our internet connection became unreliable at critical moments. Security camera footage would mysteriously glitch during the nights when the most significant vandalism occurred. More dead plants, our garbage cans overturned and scattered across the lawn. The violation notices now included threats of liens against our property for the accumulating fines, which had reached an astronomical sum that bore no relationship to reality. I responded with disciplined countermeasures, hardwired security systems with battery backups, dead drops for communication, with Maria Rodriguez using methods I hadn't employed in years. A neighbor 3 streets over, a former Marine named Davis, noticed what was happening and quietly offered his support. He'd experienced similar harassment until he capitulated to their demands about his landscaping. Together, we began mapping the pattern, which homes were being targeted, what they had in common, how the HOA operated its surveillance. We discovered that Evelyn Sharp's nephew served on the local zoning board, and her brother-in-law worked in the county assessor's office. This was a family operation with tentacles reaching into local government. The breaking point came on Thursday morning. Sarah returned from the hospital to find Chad and 2 other men attempting to enter our backyard with what appeared to be geological surveying equipment. When she confronted them, they claimed they had authority to conduct underground inspections due to suspected utility violations. Sarah, to her eternal credit, stood her ground and recorded the interaction on her phone. Their frustration was palpable, their anger barely contained. That's when I arrived home from meeting with Maria. I saw the confrontation unfolding, saw the way Chad stepped into Sarah's personal space, saw the other 2 men moving to flank her. My response was instantaneous and instinctive. I didn't shout or run. I simply moved, covering the distance between us with an economy of motion that made them startle. My voice was dangerously calm when I informed them they were trespassing and that the police had been called. Their bluff collapsed immediately. They knew they had no legal standing for forced entry. But as they retreated, Chad turned back with a venomous smile. "You should have taken the money when you had the chance. Morrison, now you're gonna lose everything." That night, I received a packet in the mail with no return address. Inside were photographs of Sarah leaving the hospital, me meeting with Maria, even Mr. Gable working in his garden. Someone had been watching us far more closely than I'd realized. Across one photo, written in red ink, "Last chance to walk away." The message was clear. They knew our movements, our alliances, our patterns. The noose was tightening. If you were in our shoes, what would you do? Comment below. I'm curious what you'd try. But what they didn't understand was that they'd just shown me their hand. And in warfare, intelligence is everything. The surveillance photographs changed the equation entirely. This wasn't just HOA enforcement. This was professional-grade intelligence gathering. The angles, the timing, the selection of images all suggested training beyond typical private security. That night, I lay awake running through possibilities, my mind analyzing patterns the way I'd once planned high-value target operations. The hawk symbol, the strategic resources, the political connections, the professional surveillance, it all pointed towards something larger than local corruption. At dawn, I reached out through channels I hadn't accessed since retirement using encryption protocols that would alert certain friends that I was active again. The response came faster than I expected. The hawk symbol belonged to a private military contractor called Falcon Solutions that had been involved in resource extraction. conflicts in 3 different countries. Their specialty was securing mineral rights through whatever means necessary, often working through local proxies to maintain deniability. Charles Sharp hadn't just been a developer, he'd been Falcon's point man for domestic acquisitions. When he died, his wife Evelyn had taken over the operation, using the HOA as her cover. This explained the precision of their harassment campaign, the professional surveillance, the connections to local government. We weren't fighting a homeowners association. We were facing a corporate resource extraction operation with military capabilities. The violation notices, the fines, the intimidation. It was all theater designed to create legal pretext for seizing the land through eminent domain or forcing sales at distressed prices. Maria Rodriguez confirmed my fears when I met her that afternoon, her face grim. She discovered that Evelyn Sharp had filed preliminary eminent domain paperwork with the county, citing the violation history as evidence of homeowner negligence regarding strategically important land. The hearing was scheduled in just 10 days. They weren't trying to fine us into compliance. They were building a case to take our homes outright. As we spoke, Maria received a text message that made her go pale. Her daughter's school had reported a suspicious person asking about pickup arrangements. The message was clear: back off or your family pays the price. I saw the moment her courage broke, the terrible calculation every parent makes when facing danger. I told her to disengage, to protect her family. This was my fight now. Driving home, I noticed the dark sedan was back, this time with 2 occupants. They made no attempt to conceal their surveillance now. The mask had come off completely. For when I arrived home, I found Sarah waiting with a determined expression. She'd been researching too, using her hospital access to dig into medical records. Evelyn Sharp had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer 6 months earlier. This land grab was her final legacy project, something that would explain the sudden escalation in aggression. We were facing a dying woman with nothing to lose and a private military contractor at her disposal. The battle lines were drawn, the enemy identified. Now came the part I understood best: how to win. With 10 days until the eminent domain hearing, the operation shifted into its final phase. Every move became calculated, every action part of a larger strategy. I reached out to my former teammate again, this time with a specific request. I needed everything he could find on Falcon Solutions' domestic operations, particularly any violations of the Defense Production Act or illegal resource extraction. Meanwhile, Sarah used her position at the hospital to discreetly access Evelyn Sharp's medical records, building a profile of her medications, treatment schedule, and mental state. A dying opponent is unpredictable, but patterns of behavior still emerge. We reached out to the previous homeowners, finding 3 families who had been forced out. Their stories were strikingly similar: escalating violations, personal threats, finally an offer to buy at a fraction of market value just to make the harassment stop. 2 agreed to provide sworn affidavits about their experiences. Davis, the former Marine neighbor, helped me install additional security measures and kept watch when I needed to be elsewhere. Mr. Gable, despite his fear, provided crucial information about the original land development and Charles Sharp's connections. The pieces were coming together, but time was running out. The harassment intensified dramatically. Our power was cut for 36 hours based on a falsified maintenance request. Our credit cards were mysteriously frozen. Fake complaints were filed with Sarah's hospital administration, suggesting drug diversion. Each attack was designed to isolate us, to drain our resources, to make us doubt our allies. The night before the hearing, they made their final move. I awoke to the sound of breaking glass downstairs. Moving silently, I retrieved the tactical flashlight from my nightstand. No weapons in the house, per my promise to Sarah, but some habits die hard. I found 2 men in black tactical gear attempting to access my workshop computer. They were professionals, quiet, efficient, moving with purpose, but they were unprepared for a homeowner who understood room clearing and close quarters combat. The confrontation was brief and brutal. I used their momentum against them, disabling one with a pressure point technique that left him unconscious, the other with a joint lock that separated his shoulder. Neither man had identification, but their equipment was military grade. As I secured them with zip ties, I noticed something familiar about the unconscious man's tattoo. a unit insignia from a special operations group that worked closely with Falcon Solutions. These weren't HOA enforcers. These were corporate mercenaries. While Sarah called the police, I downloaded the contents of their comms devices to a secure drive. The data revealed everything: communications with Evelyn Sharp, orders to plant evidence of code violations, even plans to sabotage our plumbing to create water damage that would support the eminent domain case. This was the proof we needed. As the police took the men away, Chad arrived in his HOA golf cart, his face a mask of fury. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life, Morrison." I smiled for the first time in weeks. "No, the mistake was yours when you laid hands on my wife. Tomorrow, this ends." The countdown to the hearing had become a countdown to their destruction. The eminent domain hearing was held in the county government building, a place that should have represented justice but felt more like enemy territory. Evelyn Sharp arrived flanked by lawyers and several board members, including a pale and nervous-looking Chad. She looked frail but determined, her eyes burning with a feverish intensity. Our side consisted of Maria Rodriguez, who had refused to abandon us, the three previous homeowners, Mr. Gable, Davis, and Sarah, holding my hand with a grip that spoke volumes. The hearing began with Evelyn's attorneys presenting their case, slide after slide of violation notices, photographs of supposed property neglect, expert testimony about the strategic importance of the mineral rights. They painted a picture of irresponsible homeowners jeopardizing community resources for personal stubbornness. When it was our turn, Maria began methodically dismantling their case. She presented evidence of selective enforcement, showing identical violations of board members' properties that went unpunished. She introduced the sworn statements from previous homeowners about the harassment campaign. She revealed the financial connections between Evelyn Sharp and Falcon Solutions, showing how the HOA fines were being funneled to offshore accounts. The room began to stir uncomfortably. County officials who had seemed bored now leaned forward attentively. Then I took the stand. I described the assault on Sarah, the vandalism, the surveillance. I presented the security footage of the attempted break-in, the data from the mercenaries, devices showing communication with Evelyn herself. I saved the final piece for last, the medical records showing Evelyn's diagnosis and her desperate need to secure this legacy project before her death. As I spoke, I watched Evelyn's composure crack. The calm, collected board president became a desperate woman watching her life's work unravel. When I revealed that I knew about Falcon Solutions, about her husband's role, about the illegal resource, extraction plans, she finally broke. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," she shouted, rising unsteadily to her feet. "This isn't about your pathetic little house. This is about national security, strategic resources." The room fell silent at her outburst. Her lawyers tried to quiet her, but the dam had burst. She began raving about semiconductor production, water rights, enemies of the state. In her desperation, she confessed to everything: the coordinated harassment, the fabricated violations, the use of Falcon Solutions to intimidate homeowners. The county officials stared in stunned silence as a respectable board president unraveled into a confessing criminal. Chad tried to flee but was stopped by Davis and a court officer. Hearing dissolved into chaos as police were called. Evelyn was taken into custody, still shouting about national security. Chad and several board members were arrested on the spot. The eminent domain petition was dismissed with prejudice. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed as the story broke local. HOA president revealed as front for military contractor in massive resource grab. Sarah squeezed my hand, her face filled with relief and exhaustion. "It's over, Jack. It's finally over." But as I watched Evelyn being led away, her eyes met mine. With a look of pure hatred, "This isn't over," she mouthed silently. "Falcon still has assets." The battle was won, but I knew with cold certainty that the war might have just begun. In the weeks that followed, the unraveling was comprehensive and satisfying. Evelyn Sharp pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including extortion, conspiracy, and misuse of public office. Several county officials resigned amid investigations into corruption. Falcon Solutions faced federal scrutiny for domestic operations that violated their charter, their stock price collapsing overnight. The HOA was placed under receivership, with all fines reversed and new elections scheduled. Our street became A different place almost immediately. Neighbors emerged from their homes, actually talking to each other, comparing stories of the harassment they'd endured in silence. Block parties replaced suspicious glances. The constant surveillance vanished. The dark sedans disappeared, and the only golf carts now belonged to teenagers doing lawn care. Sarah's herb garden flourished without interference, the trellis standing. As a symbol of resistance rather than violation, I expanded my woodworking to include repairs for neighbors who'd suffered vandalism, finding unexpected peace in the simple act of rebuilding what had been broken. Mr. Gable gifted us a beautiful rose bush to replace the dead one, his hands steady now when he waved from his porch. The newspaper headlines celebrated our victory, but the real triumph was quieter, the restoration of a community that had been held hostage by fear. One evening, as Sarah and I sat watching the sunset from our porch, a familiar car pulled up. Chad Wilson stepped out, looking diminished without his clipboard and polo shirt. He approached hesitantly, hands in pockets. "I came to apologize," he said, his eyes on the ground. "I didn't know about the cancer or the company or any of it. I thought we were just keeping standards." Sarah, ever the nurse, offered him a glass of lemonade. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "They offered me a job at Falcon after the army. I was struggling and it seemed respectable." He looked at me directly for the first time. "You were SEALs, weren't you?" I nodded once. "Team 3. He let out a long breath. "I thought so. The way you moved that night, I should have recognized it. We all should have." He left shortly after, a slightly straighter set to his shoulders. Sarah took my hand. "Do you think he'll be all right?" I watched his taillights disappear around the corner. We all heal differently. Some wounds just take longer. The following week, we received one final piece of mail from the HOA, a notice of dissolution and a refund check for all our paid fines. As I looked at the check, I noticed the watermark was gone. The hawk had finally been grounded. But that night, I dreamt of dark sedans and unfamiliar symbols. And I knew that somewhere, someone was already drawing new plans. Because peace, like freedom, requires constant vigilance, and some battles choose you forever.